Morning, everybody. Crappy Mondays, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by the Mirror's political correspondent, Dave Burke. Morning, Dave.
Morning.
Now, this is the People's Pay-Per-View, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to deal with them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to ask yourselves when your family is all going to be in one place again. So, what have we got for you today? Well, speaking of that, the Mirror has splashed on the British mum of a young woman held hostage in Gaza by Hamas since the atrocities of October the 7th, exactly a year ago today. Now, Mandy Damari is desperate for her daughter to be home safe. More on that in a bit. But first, let's go to domestic politics. And page 2, where the other story that's leading the agenda today, probably one of the most well-known names, if not faces, in the country, has resigned from her role in government just 100 days in, we think. Now, Dave, can you tell us what's happened to Sue Gray?
Yeah, I mean, this has been a situation that's been rumbling on for a while. It's been incredibly messy for Keir Starmer. There's obviously been a lot of internal conflict within Number 10. Sue Gray, obviously former civil servant, was sort of years of experience in Whitehall, was brought in to bring that level of professionalism and government know-how to the new Labour regime. But it's not gone as smoothly as he'd like. I mean, certainly there's been a lot of internal briefing. There's been a conflict between herself and Morgan McSweeney, who has now taken over as Keir Starmer's chief of staff. And we've seen a lot of briefing. I mean, it was telling how her salary suddenly became a matter of discourse a couple of weeks ago. The fact that she got paid more than the Prime Minister isn't necessarily something that would cause a lot of surprise to people. I mean, certainly you would get sort of very highly paid civil servants. You know, she's kind of effectively got a huge job in Number 10, and but it was the fact that this was leaked into the public domain. It does show that there's an awful lot of bad feeling within Number 10. There's certainly been sort of weeks and weeks of briefing suggesting that there's been issues around access to the Prime Minister. About memos being delayed, being passed on, and so forth, that people have said are slowing down, slowing down things getting moving. So there's been from the sound of it, there's been a really toxic dynamic between allies of Morgan McSweeney, as I mentioned, and and with Sue Gray.
Yeah, and this is the woman who, if you remember the name, this is the woman who wrote the report into Partygate, and was supposed to be as well sort of a really clean broom, wasn't she? And I suppose moral and into doing things the right way and all the rest of it, and was pictured at a football match having received some hospitality alongside Keir Starmer and others. So she was sort of also starting to become tainted with this sense of slight sleaze that we've seen being talked about in the first few days of the Labour government. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think it's reasonable that Sue Gray should have to move on? Do you think that this is actually, if she was a man in that job, would she have had quite the same attacks? I suspect Morgan McSweeney is also on a very nice salary. I don't know if we're ever going to hear what it is. As his chief of staff, I mean, the role, Dave, is very much to keep people from the Prime Minister, isn't it? Because everyone wants to get in. I need to speak to the Prime Minister about this, and half of the job is saying no.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's a job. I mean, it's a real labour of love, I'd imagine. I mean, certainly, as we know, it's well paid, but the level of stress that goes with it, and it's a job that hasn't had a lot of longevity. For some time. I mean, certainly under the Tories, as much as they tore through prime ministers, they also tore through chiefs of staff at a rate of knots, and it's it's a very, very, very difficult role. There's all kinds of aspects to it in terms of sort of taking control of the prime minister's image, of kind of running the day to day, making sure that the political staff, civil servants, are sort of working in tune with each other, and trying to drive the government's sort of program forward. It's certainly not a job for the faint-hearted.
No, it's the Leo in the West Wing job, isn't it? It's a sticky one. Any thanks for it whatsoever from anybody, I think, apart possibly from the person in charge if they know what you're doing. But the job is to try and keep stuff off their desk to some extent. Now, Sue was supposed to be the civil service genius, as you said, who was supposed to bring professionalism to Keir Starmer's rather inexperienced team. And it didn't really work out like that, has it? I mean, no matter how you voted and whether you think some of the scandals that have been talked about in the last sort of couple of months that mean anything or not, it really hasn't worked out that way.
No, I mean, I think
professional. Sorry, Dave.
Well, I think it's been a problem. I mean, in the Commons, we saw an awful lot of mudslinging at her, sort of at the point where she was offered the job in the first place. Obviously, the fact that she had led that report into Boris Johnson and the Partygate scandal, it was, already they were kind of on the back foot over the fact that she was then moving over to Labour, which then, as we've seen from Boris Johnson, his griping and sort of playing the victim, we've seen that he's been able to present this now as a sort of, a Labour Party purist has, led this witch hunt into him, which is obviously, sort of overlooks an awful lot of things.
Yeah.
But, she's become a figure of hate within the Tory circle, and that's played out in the Commons as well as, within the press and everything like that. So it was already a very difficult appointment.
Yeah, and it's always, if you're a woman in that role, it's always just going to be worse. I'm afraid it really just is. What can you tell us about Morgan McSweeney? We'll see how professional, of course, the things are going to be. Now she's moved on. Is it going to be any more professional? Is he less experienced than she is? Is it going to get worse? What can you tell us about him, Dave?
Well, he's very much he's very much at the centre of the Starmer project. Sort of like you say, Sue Gray was brought in very much for her knowledge of Whitehall, which is something that, Morgan McSweeney has very much been a sort of party activist, party insider for many, many years. He ran the Labour election campaign and is a very popular figure among sort of large sections. He is.
Oh, he is.
He is a very popular figure among large sections of the parliamentary group. I mean, I think it will certainly be a different tone. I think there's a lot more things that are going to be handed over to different sections. I think he's not going to be, there were accusations that Sue Gray was trying to run everything from the centre. I think we're going to see a lot more things delegated. I mean, particularly in terms of communications, I think there was a lot of frustration within the Labour fold that sort of it was felt that the news cycle wasn't being managed as well as it could do.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot more control.
Understatement, Dave. I think it was abysmal. Pretty bad. Example at the weekend, wasn't there, when after the Chagos Island agreement last week, and Keir Starmer was asked an obvious question at a press conference after a meeting afterwards, which was, well, are you going to give away the Falklands next? The answer to which is no.
Yeah.
Next question. And he didn't actually answer it. So he's not very nimble when he's suddenly caught out by something he's not briefed by. But someone should have briefed him before he went out there. Look, Falklands has got nothing to do with Chagos. Not in any way similar, but you're going to get asked this, and the Daily Mail is going to try and link one to the other. So when they ask this, just say no. And
I think this is the thing. I mean, and I think we're going to see a big sea change in that. I think, Morgan McSweeney certainly has that political nous that maybe Sue Gray didn't. And I think there's going to be, sort of, we'd imagine that it's probably going to be a lot more sort of smoother presentation wise as a result, with a lot more delegation to the communications team and to the, sort of a lot more sort of news management, which wasn't necessarily Sue Gray's background. And to be fair, it sounds like we're making her a scapegoat in saying that, because obviously there were very specific reasons why she was brought in. But, this has turned very, very ugly for Keir Starmer. And it's very difficult because it raises questions about his ability to put the right people in the right places, particularly when we know that, the reason that so much of this got out was because there was so much discontent at number 10. Exactly.
And all the people around in that group must have been the ones who were briefing. And when he recruited Sue Gray, it was seen as this massive coup, wasn't it? The Tories really hated it. It was a political win. She was going to be this super duper expert civil servant who's going to run everything really smoothly, get the machinery of government going. And it hasn't turned out that way. I suppose the issue really is whether she was fired or whether she resigned. Obviously, she's made a resignation letter, but we've all written some of those. Whether she was the source of the trouble or McSweeney, others briefing against her were the source of the trouble. And of course, whether it's going to make any difference to this sort of public perception they've got, not only the winter fuel payments, which has caused genuine anger, but this perception of slight chaos and incompetence, which is still a long way from Boris Johnson and Liz Truss levels of chaos and incompetence. But no one was expecting it once Keir Starmer came in. We were told that was not on the table. There's one thing.
No, exactly. And I think the problem is, there need to be a lot of people in number 10 sort of looking at themselves and the way they've acted in the last few months, because whatever faults you see, sort of whatever faults they may have seen in Sue Gray, certainly the fact that this has played out so publicly has only served to undermine Keir Starmer and to sort of make life more difficult for him and for the new government and the way it's perceived.
Yeah, and then of course many more rebellions likely as well in the parliamentary party, all kinds of other things. I mean, there's talk now that this will enable him to reset his government and move on to the next thing, which is going to be the budget in a week or so. But, do you think it is going to help him reset? And is it really bad that only 100 days in he needs to have a reset?
Well, not only that, I don't think it's 100 days until Saturday. I mean, certainly we feel
still 95.
Exactly. I think we're, sort of it's been, sort of the kind of the factionalism that, we've kind of got used to under the Tories. The fact that during the first 100 days there's been so much briefing against the chief of staff and it's ending so messy. Do you know what I mean? This is a real big problem. So I think there needs to be a reset, and I think they need to try and bury it, sort of put this behind them. I think certainly, like I said, a lot of people need to be looking at the way they've conducted themselves and moving forward, making sure that that this doesn't become as what we come to expect from this new government, because this is exactly, like you say, what we were supposed to be trying to get away from.
Now, John on Twitter says, so two-tier policing on the streets on pro-Palestine marches yesterday. Sue Gray, woman of the highest integrity on 170 grand a year, resigns, and 973 illegal immigrants, the highest one day ever, arrived on Saturday. Another weekend under Labour. Now, it doesn't really matter how you feel there or not. If people who are against the government are able to say that kind of thing 100 days in, then something's gone wrong, at least with the messaging, if not anything else. Richard says, if Sue Gray knows Whitehall, I'll ask her to write the manual of how that happens. Is she really darting around in her mind that much to be unique in her field? There must be other people, of course, who are of a similar level in the civil service who might be really useful at in that job. We'll have to see, won't we? Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think Sue Gray should have gone? Do you think this is going to help Keir Starmer? Do you think he's got other problems and just shuffling the deck chairs isn't going to make much difference? Get into the comments and let us know. Now, on to the main story of the day. And a year ago today, Hamas terrorists attacked Israel in what turned out to be the deadliest day for Jews since the Holocaust. 1,189 people died at a music festival on kibbutzim, in their homes, in safe rooms, in cars as they tried to flee. Much of it was filmed by the attackers, who were also accused of defiling some of the bodies. One particularly awful film showed Hamas fighters discussing whether and how to kill two little girls, primary school age, who were hiding under a table with their puppy. They were all shot. But as many have forgotten, they also took 251 hostages back with them into Gaza. Now, in the retaliation that was launched by Israel, another 43,000 people have been killed, mostly Gazans, mostly not terrorists. Small children have died under completely different, but also very similar kitchen tables when a building fell on their head. And now 1 year on, a total of 97 hostages are still unaccounted for. Missing, presumed and hoped to be alive, of varying nationalities and ethnicities, but all of them human shields for terrorists, and not really doing very well at fulfilling that role, because it would seem the Israeli government doesn't really make much effort to avoid unnecessary deaths, and it has been accused of killing some of its own hostages in the attacks on Hamas. Dave, our colleague Chris Hughes has interviewed Mandy Tamari today, one of the mums of one of these hostages, and she's a British lady. Her daughter Emily is one of those hostages. What is she saying 1 year on? I mean, she must just be in bits on a daily basis, poor woman.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, it's really heartbreaking. I mean, some of the comments she's given to Chris, sort of it's breaking my heart a little day by day. Soon there'll be nothing left in my heart. Or Emily, it's kind of, you can imagine the turmoil that the families are going through at the moment, a year on, knowing sort of the fate that's befallen some of the people that have been, that have been Hamas terrorists, not knowing, how they're being treated. I mean, it's absolutely unimaginable, knowing what happened on October the 7th, knowing the absolute level of violence that the victims of that endured, and knowing that these are the people that have got your loved one.
Yeah, and they're not hostages like held as prisoners of war. These are hostages who are held by people who think they are less than pigs and treat them as such. And it's really not anything anyone wants a loved one involved in. I would say it's probably really bad if you think that they hold a son who's of fighting age, or if you have a daughter who is of breeding age. It would just be horrific, I'd have thought. Now, the Israel government is a fairly loose coalition. It had no popular support before the October 7th attacks. We can see their protests on the streets about bringing the hostages back home again. Since then, the Israeli government's been bolstered by ultra-nationalists who really aren't helping the problem. And it's been subject to a lot of these protests, not least from the families of hostages and ordinary Israelis and Palestinians who say, in this piece in the paper as well, that they feel they want to live in peace and harmony. They want the hostages back home. They want diplomacy. They want talks. But they feel very let down by the respective leaderships of the Israeli government and Hamas, don't they?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the real tragedy of it. I mean, sort of it feels like a long time ago when, sort of even when you look back in the 90s when Bill Clinton was president and you had, Arafat and Dara Sharon that were sort of extending olive branches to each other. And you thought that at that stage there was a glimmer of hope of peace in our lifetime. And that couldn't feel further away now. I think we've, sort of for various reasons, like you say, the Israeli response to this has certainly been, has the civilian death toll as a result of this has been, absolutely unimaginable. And you've got the people of Gaza, tragically, who are kind of caught between terrorists who are happy to use them as a human shield, and the IDF, who have been dropping bombs, sort of targeting these terrorists and claiming a huge, a huge number of civilian lives.
Yeah, and their argument is the Israeli argument is, or the Israeli government argument is that Hamas are using members of the public to shelter behind and under hospitals and so on, but they do have to be cleared out, and they're urging people to get out of the way to let them do that. But when, for example, you hear in the news that someone has been killed in their bunker, or a leader of Hamas has gone, those bunkers are 50, 60, 70 feet below ground. And to get that covered with and it's all concrete all the way down. In order to get to them, they're having to drop several bunker buster bombs, one after another, to get deeper and deeper each time to actually get to the guy. And that makes a big hole in the world.
Well, I think this is the problem. I mean, this is the big ethical dilemma of fighting this kind of war, where you think how many civilian lives is worth this one person who is your target, who you can argue you're legitimately targeting in order to protect your territory.
Yeah, there's not an awful lot of precision laser guided stuff going on. Now, Richard says peace seems such a long way away. The men at the heart of all sides seem to be hugging onto war like a comfort blanket. The people on all sides are let down by their leaders and in a rut. What do you think, everybody? Have you been affected by October the 7th? Please don't get into the comments and say ridiculous and insane things, because we are going to deal with you if that's the case. Rob says they don't want to find the hostages. The hostages are a red herring to turn Gaza into another cheap holiday resort. Oh, Rob, do you want to sit there and tell that to Mandy, who's in the paper today, and hasn't seen her daughter for a year, and has no contact with her? I don't think her daughter's just, hiding because she's being paid off by Thomas Cook, right? I think that there are 97 people whose families want them home and they're not home. And if that was a member of your family, you wouldn't think there was just some kind of false flag operation or something. It may well be, but I don't know where Gaza's going to go with this or where things are going to end up. But and I think perhaps you could maybe even agree that Netanyahu isn't terribly keen on getting all the hostages home, because it's giving him a reason to keep propagating this war, which in itself is propping up his government. But those hostages are not red herrings. They're hostages and they're human beings. Go away, Rob. I've had enough. Now, we've got this situation. Paul says that's one of the problems. Hamas doesn't represent Palestinians and they aren't fighting for them. They're Iranian puppets. Here we go. Move on to the next thing then. So, 1 year on, 60% of Gaza has been flattened. Almost everyone in it is a refugee to somewhere of some sort. The war has moved north into Lebanon, where Israel, apparently tired for some reason of having rockets fired at every day, has attacked the terror group which holds sway there and its border, Hezbollah, and which, of course, is funded by Israel. Dave, we've seen exploding pagers, walkie-talkies. There's been a limited ground incursion by Israel. We haven't seen much footage from that. Where are things at now with sort of that? Because that conflict has expanded, isn't it? First they flattened Gaza, and now they've gone into Lebanon. And they've had another blitz on Beirut, as it's saying there last night.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the terrifying thing. I mean, I think if you ask 100 experts, you'll get 100 different answers. I mean, certainly we're not any closer to any sort of de-escalation. And it's difficult to see where that would come from at this stage. I mean, certainly, sort of we're seeing the conflict between Israel and Iran, which is, and absolutely terrifying and very, very, very dangerous prospect for the, for the world is sort of coming to a head. Sort of, it doesn't seem like you're overstating it to say that the risk of all-out war between the two nations, bringing the entire Middle East, is within sight.
And we're seeing there some footage from, I think it was overnight, some rockets fired by Hezbollah. I think it was Hezbollah, did get through Israel's Iron Dome protection system and landed in the port city of Haifa. And of course, there will be some injuries probably from that, if not fatalities. So, people are still firing on Israel. Israel is still firing on other people. And as Paul was saying there, the big question really is Iran. It's a republic which came into being long after the state of Israel, after the Shah fell in the 70s, but it's also got its own ultra-nationalist, fundamentalist clerics who have stoked, funded, provoked other nations and terror groups in the Middle East to act against Israel. Again, sort of hold itself up, to give itself a reason for existing. And part of that, no small part, will be because Israel is westernized. It's fairly secular. It's democratic. Its people have personal freedoms and equality. Which, Iranian mullahs really don't like any of that. But it's also because, let's face it, they're raging anti-Semites and don't want to live next door to Jews. Now, our RAF, Dave, has been called into action to prevent some of those Iranian-made missiles landing on Israel. The Defense Secretary, John Healey, was on the radio this morning being asked why he hadn't prescribed the Iranian Republican Guard as a terror organization, which is something he called for repeatedly in opposition. Why do you think that they're not saying the Iranian military are terrorists at this stage?
Well, it's, sort of, I think we're seeing across a range of issues, it's a lot easier being in opposition than it is to actually govern. And sort of when you're, when you're shouting from the sidelines, it's a lot easier to kind of take the, take the ideological position without having to deal with the practicalities of the day-to-day sort of dealing with a lot of these countries. So yeah, I mean, I think it's, it's a very valid question. Certainly, there's been a massive climb down in that. This doesn't seem to be something that is being treated as a huge matter of urgency by, by Labour. And I think we're going to see those calls grow. So, yeah, I mean, in terms of where they go with it, I mean, you would, like you say, sort of having called for it for so long, you would expect for that to be on the agenda, but it doesn't seem to be at the moment because, do you do anything that potentially sort of escalates and sort of is seen as a provocative action while, things are so tense? I mean, all these considerations will be in play.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm sure when he made those calls in opposition, October the 7th probably hadn't happened yet. And if it was after October the 7th, then, I mean, it would have been probably as a result of Iran supposedly funding what had happened on October the 7th, and perhaps what had happened in Gaza since, and obviously the conflict that's happened would not have occurred by the time John was saying that stuff. But of course, the main reason that you can't prescribe the Iranian Republican Guard at this stage is because if anyone's going to talk to anybody else to dial this down, it's the Iranians you've got to talk to. And you can't talk to them once you've said they're a terrorist. That's it. It's off the table at that point. Keir Starmer can't go and sit down with a mullah. And if that's where you have to be, if you have to get these guys on site, and also, like I say, it's provoke them if you were to start prescribing them in some way. They're already sanctioned, so you can't really do much else. And I think, well, again, it was one of those things where, the current Labour government was perhaps not very fleet-footed on when it was asked about this by journalists, and there are better and nimbler ways perhaps of answering the question along the lines of, well, things have changed a bit since I said that. Which could be done. Now, there was a poll a few days ago, before we move on to good news, this is almost a bit of good news. There's a poll a few days ago claiming 60% support, or more than that, among Palestinians for a two-state solution where Palestine and Israel could live alongside each other in peace. I don't know how they managed to do a survey in Gaza right now, but they have managed to do that. Do you think we're going to get there, Dave? Perhaps the result of all this fighting and conflict is actually going to get us there maybe a bit quicker.
I mean, it's the only possible outcome. I mean, for those who, for the Hamas extremists who want to wipe out Israel, this isn't going to happen. I think we've seen, sort of that's not that won't be a permanent solution, nor will the eradication of Gaza. I mean, it's the only way that the international community can try and move forward and create this. But the level of trust between the two countries is such that, this is going to take probably generations to get them living peacefully side by side.
Exactly.
It can be the only solution. I mean, there is no, sort of no meaningful international movement calling for one or other state to be wiped out. So, yeah, I mean, the two countries will have to coexist. So, yeah, a two-state solution is what the British government has consistently called for, even with with the change of government, and which is being called for around the world. It's, but it's difficult to see that happening peacefully within our lifetimes now.
You've got to have 50 years of that, haven't you? And for a couple of generations to pass, because you've got so many people on all sides who are deeply traumatized.
The problem is as well, you've got on both sides of the conflict now, because the level of violence, the people that were more moderate are obviously being dragged to more extreme positions. If you're having bombs dropped on you, whether you're an Israeli civilian or whether you're a Gazan, this is essentially sort of indoctrinating another generation into war being the state, the sort of constant state. And unfortunately, sort of we think that this conflict can be wrapped up in, within a timetable. But when you've got sort of two populations that mistrust each other that much and see this as the way that life's lived, unfortunately, you've got a new generation that are being normalized to war.
Yeah, there's one positive on that, which is some of the stuff that's in the paper today from people who are survivors of the attacks on the music festival and people who are relatives of hostages saying, we don't want any more war. It's not inevitable that everybody becomes more warlike once you find yourself in a conflict. Some people react the other way, and it is entirely possible that there could still be peace if people actually want to bother trying for it, and the leadership of both sides. That would be handy. Right. Thank you, Dave, for taking us through all that. Thank you, everyone, for taking part, even Rob. We have managed to find some good news in the world for you, and here it is. Now, we all know it's very important to learn the lessons of history. One man seems absolutely determined to live by that. Jay Hawkins, who's only 27, he bought a Lee Enfield rifle online and has travelled the country getting World War II heroes to sign it and share their stories for posterity. Now, he's going to loan it eventually to a museum. I presume he's also recording what these veterans say to him. But some of these survivors are people who've still never said or spoken about the war, and they're doing so now for the first and perhaps only time. It seems a bit like, Dave, we can know a bit too much about war these days. It's live streamed. But we know more than ever before. It doesn't seem to stop wars happening. But is this proof, do you think, that, if you're prepared to remember all those stories of war, that you can perhaps avoid it happening again in the future?
Well, you'd hope so. I mean, it's, you speak to this generation that essentially lost, 6 years of their lives and then had to deal with the consequences of the war, sort of afterwards. It's, yeah, I think the people that this became the day-to-day, the people that had to see absolute horrors, from the perspective of history, is certainly a good thing. So, yeah, I mean, it's definitely a worthy project that Jay's embarked on.
Yeah, what was it? 50 million dead in the end, I think, Second World War. It just puts everything else into perspective to some extent. But I think everyone forgets just how many people died in those conflicts. Right. Thank you, Dave, for taking us through that. We have managed to end on a bit of a positive note on a very grim and gloomy day. Please don't be anti-Semitic today, anybody. If you're out there watching it, just, take a day off. This one day. Do it again tomorrow, but not today. Thank you for watching, everybody. We'll be back again on Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. If you want to get in touch about anything that we missed or you think we've got wrong, then email me, susie.boniface@mirror.co.uk. If you're listening on podcast, please leave us reviews so other people can find us. Until Wednesday, everybody, stay safe, take care. Tatty bye.